Why did Putin invade Ukraine? This has to be the most asked question in the world since Russia launched fierce attacks on Ukraine in late February.
This is what Russian President Vladimir Putin unleashed on Ukraine.
Showing military tanks rolling into Ukraine.
Russia is picking off Ukraine's military facilities one after another.
Blast in the center of Ukraine's second largest city.
It is one question that continues to reverberate on everyone's lips, expert and novice alike. But have you ever paused to wonder just why Putin seems to be so obsessed with Ukraine and why exactly he sees it fit to invade a sovereign nation with the full force of Russia's military? Well, we have dug through and studied hundreds of files and cases and learned every single thing there is to know about the man called Vladimir Putin. Could the invasion of Ukraine be the first phase of Putin's plan to recreate the Soviet Union or take over control of Europe and possibly the rest of the world? What exactly does Putin want? There are lots of speculations that have been thrown into the air, but what we bring you in this video are far from needless speculations. We certainly do know what Putin actually does want from the war. So make sure to watch this video till the very end, as we'll be bringing you every detail of Putin's secret plan. But just before we get into today's video, kindly make sure to like this video, hit the subscribe button, and smash that notification to receive notifications about when we post more sizzling videos about one of the most influential and most feared men in the world right now. Do leave us a comment, as we'd love to read your opinions on the ongoing crisis. Now let's dive in. The Russia-Ukraine crisis is one with a lot of history behind it, a history dating back to as early as the 9th century. But we only have to go back to 2014 to give the current situation more context, when Russia annexed Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula. Just weeks later, Russia would go ahead to throw its weight behind separatist movements in Donetsk and Luhansk, two regions in Ukraine's eastern industrial heartland. This would result in a series of military operations from both nations in the Donbass region across the next 8 years, and in which about 14,000 people were reported dead, and with nearly 2 million people displaced. Russia's ongoing war in Ukraine has now entered a new phase, with Vladimir Putin unleashing the biggest war Europe has seen since World War II. This is a war that's only still in its third month, but the world has seen thousands of people die. Towns and cities such as Mariupol turn into ruins, and over 13 million people already displaced so far. Now, the big question remains, what exactly does Putin want? What is all this aggression for? And most importantly, how will this war end? Well, while launching the invasion on February 24th, Putin claimed in his address to the Russian people that his goal was to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine, and to ensure the maintenance of Ukraine's neutral status. Since the invasion began, Putin has refused to call it an invasion or a war, and Moscow continues to address Europe's biggest war since 1945 as merely being a special military operation. But can we take Putin's word on his reasons for the invasion as the absolute truth? Or could he possibly have more sinister reasons for the invasion that not many know of yet? Russia is now more than 2 months into its invasion of Ukraine and has failed to secure key objectives as clearly stated by Putin in his national address on the eve of the invasion. The Ukrainian resistance has been far stronger than Vladimir Putin had anticipated, and Russia has resorted to shelling civilian targets and making nuclear threats against countries supplying Ukraine with weapons. After 2 months of repeated failures to capture the capital city of Kyiv and depose its leaders, Putin has now abandoned this bid and turned his ambitions to Ukraine's east and south, the famously troubled Donbass region. Of course, Putin has never publicly mentioned wanting to capture and annex Kyiv like he successfully did with Crimea as one of his reasons for the invasion, but our thorough and painstaking research has led us to unravel this as a first of many of his sinister reasons for the invasion. You don't have to know a man like Putin up close before you understand that he's not a man to lay out all of his cards bare. Putin's grand plan is in fact to create a pathway through southern Ukraine that'd link up with Crimea and the Russian-backed separatist region of Transnistria in Moldova. Putin has on several occasions, and including in his address on the eve of his ongoing invasion, declared the collapse of the Soviet Union as one of the greatest disasters of modern history, while asserting that modern Ukraine was entirely and fully created by Russia. Quite evidently, Putin clearly nurtures ambitions to recapture territories that formerly belonged to the Soviet Union and has strong resentment towards their joining up with the West and NATO. The ongoing attacks on Ukraine clearly appear to be a smaller phase of a much grandiose scheme that's soon to unfold. Apparently, all that Putin needs to initiate the next phase of his plan is a slight trigger, a trigger that'll be initiated the moment the US or NATO openly offers the slightest military support to Ukraine. This action would constitute a violation of NATO's treaty with Russia, a treaty that's already on the brink of collapse, and would serve as the perfect alibi for Putin to drive and push his grand plan even further. After Ukraine, any of the former Soviet states could be next in line, although Moldova seems the next likely destination from all indications. Putin could as well make moves on Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Armenia, Azerbaijan, or just any of the smaller former Soviet nations. Putin clearly wants to re-establish, either directly or indirectly, by annexation or by puppet regimes, a Russian empire that would mark the resurrection of the former USSR, a supreme empire that would wipe out the existence of any democratized entity around Moscow and rid Putin's backyard of Western ideologies that might arouse dissidents close to Putin's seat of power and who may constitute a huge threat to his own political survival. By Putin's standards, Ukraine had clearly become more diverse and too westernized, and increasingly difficult to control. Hence the need for urgent and drastic action against Ukraine. Putin clearly foresees a situation where Ukraine sets the example for others in Russia who would like to become more democratic, to start revolting against Russia's autocratic dictatorial system. Ukraine stands as the largest country in Europe, excluding Russia, and Putin clearly sees his ongoing invasion of Ukraine a step ahead in time and a smart way to control and dismantle any domestic political opposition and ensure that his reign over Russia remains supreme. Another not too sinister reason for Putin's invasion of Ukraine is clearly to put a halt to NATO's expansion. NATO is a military alliance founded by 12 world nations in 1949 to check the excesses of the USSR and provide collective security to its members against the Soviet Union. NATO's membership has since grown to 30 nations, with former member nations of the USSR likewise joining the organization. It's thus not surprising why NATO is Putin's and Russia's greatest enemy, and Putin has been very open about wanting NATO to exclude Ukraine and every former Soviet state from membership. But then, this is just half the story. So let us take you a little back in time. When Putin annexed Crimea, his approval ratings skyrocketed and greatly helped keep the nationalistic drum rolling.
Greeting him, Russian President Vladimir Putin made his first visit since Russia annexed Crimea from Ukraine,
invariably keeping Putin as Russia's supreme leader. Annexing parts of Ukraine further helped Putin restore Russia's superpower image in Europe and the rest of the world at large. Like Putin, there are lots of Russians who view and consider Ukraine's independence a grave mistake, given that Ukraine has been under Russia for the most of its modern history. Again, like Putin, they are bent on risking everything to take back Ukraine, and Putin sees this as an opportunity to carve his name in the sands of time as the man who revived Russian imperialism. Putin essentially wants to redraw Europe's map, which he believes has been redrawn by the West via political and military alliances after World War II. To actualize this, Putin took a major step and basically went all in when he deployed over 100,000 Russian troops and military equipment along the border of Ukraine in November of 2021. He went on to repeatedly deny any plans to invade, only to present his list of demands to the West weeks later. His main demand was that NATO immediately stop expanding and moving closer to the Russian border. He demanded that NATO move their borders back to where they were in 1997. Western leaders rejected Putin's demands and instead put forces on standby to reinforce their military presence in Eastern Europe. Back at the Ukrainian border, Russian troops continued to gather, and Putin began conducting huge military drills along Russia's border with Belarus. Putin then went on to make the threat of war even realer on February 21, 2022, when he gave a national broadcast recognizing the separatist regions of Donetsk and Lugansk as independent states. His troops immediately crossed the Ukrainian border into these Russian-backed separatist regions under the guise of peacekeeping. Ukraine immediately responded by declaring a state of emergency, and with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky making an urgent and direct appeal to the Russian people. Putin would go ahead to launch a full-scale invasion in Ukraine in the early hours of February 24, and the war remains ongoing today, nearly 3 months later. Would Putin successfully redraw Europe's map as he intends and achieve a feat that's widely considered impossible? Only time would tell what the exact outcome of this invasion would be, but this is clearly another of Putin's undeclared reasons for attacking Ukraine. World leaders have spoken out and condemned Putin's invasion of Ukraine, Anti-war protests have broken out around. NATO's response force has been activated for the first time in history, and the US has sent additional troops to Eastern Europe. But in many ways, the world is treading carefully as Putin controls the world's largest arsenal of nuclear weapons, and no one fully understands the full extent of his plan with the invasion. Disclaimer: this is purely an informational video, and we're in no way promoting or approving Putin's recent action in any way.